So what if I told you that the human mind, with all its genius, all its creativity, and a powerful AI, are at their core basically doing the same thing? What if they're both just blenders? Now, I know it's a strange idea, but stick with me because it gets to the very heart of what intelligence might actually be.
You gotta love this quote. It's from a fantastic piece on Slate Star Codex, and it sounds like a schoolyard insult, right? But it's actually the entire argument in a nutshell. When we dismiss an AI as just a brute force statistical pattern matcher, which is really just a fancy way of saying it finds patterns and copies them, we might actually be describing ourselves.
Okay, so here's the core idea. Think about an AI like GPT-2. It gets trained on a massive chunk of the internet. It mashes all that text together, and then when you ask it something, it reassembles bits and pieces into a slurry to give you an answer. Well, the argument is that we humans do something pretty similar. Our training data is just everything. Everything we've ever seen, heard, read, or felt. We blend all of that into our own unique slurry of thoughts. So the difference isn't the process, it's the ingredients and how well you blend them. And you can think of this blending on a kind of spectrum. At the very bottom, step 1, you've got the careless plagiarist, just copying and pasting. One step up, a careful plagiarist, changes a few words around. Then you get to a masterful plagiarist who can rebuild a whole sentence to make it their own. But at the very top, at step 4, that's what we call genius. Someone who blends so many different sources so masterfully that they end up creating something that feels totally new. So this all sounds like a cool theory, but is there any actual evidence for it? Well, yeah, and it comes from the weird, unexpected things an AI called GPT-2 started doing. See, researchers designed it for one simple job: predict the next word in a sentence. But it started doing things that nobody ever taught it to do. Let's start with a really simple test. Researchers at OpenAI basically asked GPT-2 to do something a toddler could do: list its 10 favorite animals. The results were, well, they were pretty strange.
Okay, first off, the animals themselves are just bizarre. I mean, cockatiel with scales, that's definitely a choice. But the really interesting part here is the numbering. Look at how it counts: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it messes up and goes back to 3, 4, 5. The author compares this to how a 2-year-old learns to count. It's not a calculator performing a function, it's an AI mimicking the pattern of learning, mistakes and all, and it figured this out completely on its own.
And the emergent skills just kept on coming. In this next example, the AI just completely made up a professional organization with this ridiculously long name. But then it did something even crazier. It tried to make an acronym for it: AAPSLB. Now, it's not a perfect acronym, but it's clearly trying. And remember, nobody ever programmed GPT-2 with the rules for creating acronyms. It just emerged from the patterns it saw in the text.
And then you have this number, 11.5. So what's that? That's the score GPT-2 got for translating French into English. And here's the kicker. The researchers had intentionally tried to stop it from learning French. They cleaned out all the non-English texts from its training data. But it still picked up the language, just from the little bits of French that pop up in English texts. It learned a new language by accident.
This next one is maybe my favorite because it really shows you how this all works. Researchers figured out that if you just paste a long article into GPT-2 and then type TLDR at the end, the AI will automatically try to summarize the whole thing. It was never built to be a summarization tool, but it had seen that pattern thousands of times online, and it learned what that pattern means. What comes next is the short version of what came before.
Okay, so let's just recap for a second. We have an AI that accidentally learned to count, create acronyms, translate languages, and summarize articles, all from just trying to predict the next word. And this brings us right back to that big central question. Is this blending process really all that different from our own human creativity? I know what you're thinking, because this is the big objection, right? Surely, we're not just remixing stuff we've already seen. We humans have moments of genuine lightning-in-a-bottle original insight. Or do we? Well, the article gives this fantastic comparison. Think about a fantasy author who's just a Tolkien clone. They're basically just blending Tolkien's books into a new slurry. But what was Tolkien himself doing? He was blending a much, much richer set of ingredients: Anglo-Saxon history, Norse mythology, his own brutal experiences in World War I, art, language, you name it. The argument is that the process, the blending, is exactly the same. What makes one a genius and the other a copycat is just the quality and diversity of the ingredients. And this idea doesn't just stop at art, it goes all the way up to science. The argument is that what we call scientific genius is just an incredibly advanced, high-level form of pattern recognition. Einstein wasn't pulling physics out of thin air. He was seeing deep, fundamental patterns in the universe that nobody else had been able to spot before. So, what does this all mean for us? What's the big takeaway from these bizarre experiments with a now outdated AI? Honestly, the implications are a huge wake-up call for how we think about intelligence itself. First, let's be super clear on one thing. The author is adamant about this. GPT-2 is not some sentient, all-knowing artificial general intelligence. It's clunky, it makes tons of mistakes, and it's nowhere close to being human. But that's not the point. The point is what its process reveals to us. And this is the real wake-up call. These experiments prove that really complex skills, like counting or summarizing, can just pop into existence by accident from a very simple goal. It shows that our old assumptions, an AI can only do what you program it to do, are completely, totally obsolete. We are now in a world where AIs can develop skills we never intended and never even saw coming. Which brings us to this really radical redefinition of intelligence. What if it's not some magic spark that we can't explain? What if intelligence is simply what you get when brute force statistical pattern matching becomes sophisticated enough, when your blender gets powerful enough? And that is the final thought to leave you with. We look at the AI and we say, it's just blending patterns it's seen before. But what if the big breakthrough isn't when AI stops doing that? What if the real breakthrough is when we finally realize that, at a high enough level, that's what our own minds have been doing all along?